On a winter evening, a grandfather sits in the nursery beside his retired K9, studying a furnace notice and an old baby monitor on the dresser. Most nights he listens to his granddaughter's breathing and the dog's patrol, telling himself alarms are behind him. Tonight the storm leans on the windows, and when he reaches for the papers, the old shepherd blocks the glowing monitor. And he feels this choice could cost more than a night. The house settles differently at night now. The grandchildren's toys are stacked in a laundry basket by the hallway. Tiny socks folded over the rim like white flags. Down the hall, the spare room glows with a thin bar of lamplight under the door, and a faint hiss from a small speaker rides above the fridge hum, like someone whispering through a seashell pressed to the wall. Most evenings, I tell myself I should turn that thing off. The little white box sits on the old wooden dresser, its green light burning soft and patient, pointed toward the crib we only use on weekends. I pass the doorway and catch the glow in the corner of my eye. The skin on my arms tightens as if the air remembers something I've forgotten and is trying to nudge it back to the surface. Floorboards complain in familiar places, but tonight one step creaks out of rhythm, a half beat late behind me. I pause in the hallway, listening. There's the low tick of the heater, the distant roar of a semi on the highway, the faint whoosh from the vents. Nothing else. Old houses grumble, I mutter, but my heartbeat lingers high in my chest, like it used to on nights when I waited for the phone to ring. On the hall table, my boot sits turned the wrong way, toe angled toward the door instead of the wall. I frown, rubbing the ache in my lower back and replaying the evening. Maybe I bumped it with the laundry basket earlier. Maybe I didn't. A thin thread of cool air slips along the floor, skimming my ankles, carrying a trace of outside damp and something warmer, a lived-in scent that clings low near the baseboards. In the living room, the recliner cushion shows a shallow dip on the side I don't use. I smooth my palm over the fabric, feeling the faint warmth still trapped there, as if someone has only just stood up. The TV remote lies slightly askew, not where I left it, tilted toward the hallway. A soft tap-tap sounds on the hardwood, then stops so neatly that I wonder if I imagined it, or if memory is playing tricks in this older body. I stand in the hallway again, halfway between the kitchen and that half-open door. The faint hiss from the baby monitor on the dresser threads into my ears, thin as a radio between stations. For a second, I swear I hear another sound riding with it a slow exhale, a weight shifting on boards I can't see. Just the wiring, I tell myself, palm pressed flat to the wall as if I could feel the current calming it down. The air thickens when I step closer to the spare room. The small lamp inside throws a slice of light across the hall, catching the edge of a leash coiled on a hook like a question mark. Beside it, A worn collar sways almost imperceptibly, metal tag kissing the wall with the softest click. My chest tightens, and I step back, shaking my head hard. Habit, I whisper. That's all this is. Just habit and old nerves. I reach for the nursery light switch, then stop with my fingers hovering. The green glow from the old baby monitor on the wooden dresser stares back through the cracked door, steady as a watchful eye. The hiss in the speaker flutters, then steadies again, like a breath taken and held. Something in this house, in these walls, these floorboards, this quiet machine feels like it's still on duty, waiting for a signal I can't quite hear. Chapter 2. The Shape in the Doorway. Morning finds me at the kitchen table, coffee cooling in my hands, while steam curls away in thin ribbons. The sun pushes a pale stripe across the worn linoleum, stopping just short of the hallway. From there, the spare room door stands half open at the same narrow angle as last night. I hear a faint shff of movement, nails brushing wood in a slow, measured rhythm. Then the sound fades into the refrigerator's tired sigh. A shadow leans into the hallway before I see him, a familiar outline pausing at the threshold. Ears lift, head tilts. Then he steps into the light, fur catching the sun like dust motes. His joints are stiffer than they used to be, but there's nothing uncertain about the way he moves. He doesn't look at me at first. He looks past me, down the hall toward that small glow. I follow his gaze and see the green light on the old baby monitor on the wooden dresser, steady as ever. He walks the perimeter of the kitchen the same way each day, a slow patrol between doorways and windows. A soft jingle of metal tags follows him, a sound that once meant night calls and hurried boots pulled on in the dark. Now it just echoes off the cabinets, small and stubborn. He pauses where my boot was turned last night, noses the spot, then moves on, claws making that careful tap-tap I heard when the house was supposed to be sleeping. I watch the hair on my forearm lift as he passes behind my chair. It isn't fear exactly, more like my body remembering tension even when I tell my mind to relax. He exhales close to my elbow, a warm puff against my sweater, and I realize I've been holding my breath without meaning to. Easy. Walt. I tell myself, pretending the words are for me and not for the old working dog beside me. Old houses, old men. We hear ghosts in everything. By late afternoon, the light in the hallway turns gold, dust floating through it in slow, lazy spirals. He returns to the same spot, planting himself where the runner rug meets the hardwood, eyes fixed on the spare room. Inside, the crib waits under its quilt, empty until the weekend. The baby monitor's speaker lets out a brief crackle, then a low hum. His ears twitch toward it. Body suddenly still. Nose testing the air drifting from the open door. I step beside him and feel an odd chill along my neck. Even though the heater is working fine and the thermostat reads comfortable. From here I can see the old baby monitor on the wooden dresser, angled perfectly toward the crib. A tiny scuff marks the floor beneath it, as if paws or feet have shuffled there more than I remember. You're just used to radios, I say aloud, more to convince myself than to explain him. That little box sounds like work. That's all. He blinks once, slow, as if he heard the word work and weighed it carefully. Then he pads forward, stops just short of the dresser, and sits without being asked. His gaze stays on the glowing green speaker light as if it were a signal waiting to break. I feel my heart thudding a little too hard. My palms suddenly damp. There's nothing there. I insist, hearing how thin it sounds in the quiet. No call, no alarm, just static and an old man's nerves. That evening, after my daughter drops off the baby bag and kisses my cheek at the door, he is already in position by the time I set the diaper pack on the chair. He stands next to the old baby monitor on the wooden dresser, shoulders squared, head turned toward the speaker. The faint hiss curls through the room, and he doesn't look away. Why that little box? I murmur, fingers resting on his back. His muscles are tight, braced, as if waiting for a sound only he is sure will come. Chapter 3. What work used to mean. Before this quiet house and this glowing plastic box, his nights were louder and sharper around the edges. My son Mark used to send me pictures from training fields, floodlights burning against black sky, cones and ropes marking search lanes, handlers in reflective vests. In every photo, there he was at my boy's side, lean and bright-eyed, harness snug around his chest, nose tipped towards some dark line of trees where people pretended to be lost but the risk still felt real. Back then, the sounds in his world were sirens and crackling radios, not the gentle hiss of a baby monitor on a wooden dresser. Mark told me how he learned to watch red and green LEDs on the base station, to react before the tones fully sounded. He feels the room change. My son said once, when the dispatcher breathes in to talk, he already knows we're going. I didn't understand it then. It sounded like handler pride. Now, listening to him respond to the smallest electronic sigh, I believe it. They worked snowstorms along the river, where ice buckled under unwary boots and the cold crawled up through wet pant legs. They searched basements after spring floods, wading through brown water that swallowed their knees and carried the smell of mud and broken things. Nights in the truck, heater barely keeping up, Mark's hand resting on that furred neck while the dispatch scanner murmured in the dark. Every beep, every burst of static meant someone needed them. Waiting was its own kind of pressure. When Mark died, no hero story for the papers. Just a heart that stopped too soon on a jog behind the station the unit called me. They talked about paperwork and retirement options. Their voices tangled with grief and protocol. He keeps waiting by the gear locker. One handler said quietly. Sits there when the radio beeps. Looking for Mark. We thought, maybe he shouldn't keep waiting like that. That's how the leash and the collar ended up on my wall, and a working dog ended up in my too quiet house. The first night he slept here, he paced until near dawn, nails clicking across every room in restless loops. I heard him pause near the old clock in the hall when it chimed the hour. Then by the open window when a train horn floated in from town. When the distant volunteer siren wound up, a leftover from my own days on call. He trotted to the door, sat, and looked back at me with eyes that were both question and command, asking why we weren't moving. I wasn't ready for the past those sounds carried. I shut off the scanner in the kitchen, unplugged the radio my son had left here years ago. I told myself I was doing it for my own healing, turning the volume down on ghosts. But the house felt wrong afterward, like a stage with all the cues removed. He kept patrolling anyway, listening for signals that never came. His roots tracing invisible lines between doors and windows, as if the county map had been laid over my floor. When my daughter announced she was moving back to town, baby on the way and no space in their apartment, I panicked at the thought of more monitors, more alarms. She brought the baby monitor in a cardboard box, bright white plastic and cheerful pictures on the side. Just so we can hear her, she said, setting it on the old wooden dresser in the spare room where Mark's old trophies once sat. I stared at the tiny green light on the packaging and felt my chest constrict as if a door were closing. He stepped closer while we unboxed it, sniffing the coiled cord, ears flicking at each bit of crinkling plastic. When we finally plugged it in, the speaker's first hiss filled the room, thin and steady, humming like a very small radio trying to find a station. His whole body shifted toward it, as if an old switch had flipped deep inside. My daughter laughed, thinking he was curious about baby gear. I saw something else immediately. Recognition, and maybe relief. To him, that sound was work again, compressed and waiting. That night, the crib stood empty, but the old baby monitor on the wooden dresser stayed on, casting that cool green glow across the wall. I tried to sleep with my bedroom door closed, but the faint hiss threaded through anyway, seeping under the jamb like mist. Somewhere down the hall, nails tapped the floor in slow arcs, passing, returning, passing again. The house was supposed to be moving toward rest, toward retirement and quiet. Instead, it felt like we had joined a new kind of watch, one I hadn't agreed to but couldn't quite turn off. Chapter 4: First Signals. The first time my granddaughter spent the night here, the house held its breath right along with me. We laid her in the crib under a soft quilt, her little hands curled beside her cheeks, lashes dark against flushed skin. My daughter adjusted the angle of the old baby monitor on the wooden dresser until the green light pointed square at the slats. The speaker downstairs came alive with soft static and the tiniest sighs, barely louder than my own pulse in my ears, but insistent. He stood in the doorway, nails resting on the rug, head tilted. When the baby let out a sleepy whimper, the sound arrived downstairs a heartbeat later, thin but clear through the speaker. His ears snapped forward, and he took 2 steps into the room, stopping just shy of the crib. I watched the muscles along his back tense, every inch of him listening. Then, when the whimper faded to little snorts, he eased himself down on the floor, spine parallel to the crib like a living rail between her and the rest of the world. I sat in the rocking chair at first, telling myself I needed to stay until she settled, fingers worrying the armrest smooth. But after a while, my eyelids drooped, and my lower back complained. He didn't move, chest rising in slow, steady waves. The baby's breaths on the monitor matched his, a faint in-out duet. My body, traitorous thing, relaxed to that rhythm. "You've got first watch," I whispered, touching the fur between his ears before slipping out into the dim hallway. Downstairs, the speaker on the table played that same quiet song, his occasional snuffle, the baby's tiny sighs, the whisper of air through vents. The fridge hummed, the clock ticked, but the sound that anchored me was that blend of breathing. Every so often, there was a rustle of fabric, a soft thump as he shifted position upstairs. I learned to hear him through the monitor, not just her. It felt less like a machine and more like a stethoscope pressed against the heart of the house. A week later, I forgot to switch the monitor on. I laid my granddaughter down after a bottle, kissed her forehead, and shuffled toward the hall, already thinking about the dishes downstairs. Behind me, there was a low whine, almost a question. I turned to see him standing by the dresser, eyes on the silent baby monitor, then flicking to me. He nosed the base of it, tags chiming softly, and gave another short sound that held more insistence this time, like a gentle reprimand. My fingers hovered over the power button longer than they should have. Some part of me still flinched at the idea of inviting constant listening back into my life. Too many nights had been carved up by beeps. But his gaze held steady, not anxious, just certain, as if he knew my hesitation and was willing to wait it out. Finally, I pressed the switch. The green light bloomed, and the faint hiss filled the room again. He turned away from me then and settled by the crib, as if the matter was settled and the shift had officially begun. "All right," I muttered. "You win. We listen." Later that month, a siren wailed somewhere beyond the river. One of the volunteer trucks heading out on a call. The sound slanted through the night, thinner than I remembered, but still sharp enough to cut. I sat up in bed, every muscle braced, old training firing even after all these years. Upstairs, the monitor carried a muffled bark, cut short, and the thud of paws crossing the nursery floor. Then came a gentle scrape and a soft, sleepy coo from the crib. When I reached the nursery door, he was already lying with his side pressed against the crib, head up, ears turned not to the distant siren, but to the baby's quiet murmur. The old baby monitor on the wooden dresser glowed between us, humming with breath and tiny noises. I realized, hand on the doorframe, that had chosen his frequency. Old work sounds might still tug at him, but this new sound held him in place. That was the first night I truly believed he wasn't just restless. He was choosing a different watch. As weeks turned into months, our patterns set in like grooves worn into wood. At 9 each evening, I'd straighten the quilt in the crib, check the monitor's cord, and glance at the green light. He would appear like clockwork, padding down the hall to take his post by the door or at the dresser. Sometimes he nudged my knee if I moved too quickly, as if reminding me not to rush the rituals. Little by little, the unease that had stalked the edges of the house began to shift into something else, expectation. Maybe, or trust I wasn't quite ready to name aloud. The storm rolled in just after supper, low and mean, flattening what was left of the autumn leaves against the street. Rain ticked against the windows in uneven bursts, the wind pushing it sideways so it scraped instead of fell. My daughter checked the weather app 3 times, brows knit, before deciding to stay the night instead of driving back across the ridge with the baby. "It'll blow through by morning," I told her, but my gaze kept drifting to the swaying power lines and the dark belly of the clouds. Later, the house dimmed as clouds swallowed the last of the light. We tucked my granddaughter into the crib, warm in her footed pajamas, the quilt pulled up to her chest. I adjusted the old baby monitor on the wooden dresser, making sure its little eye faced her. The green speaker light blinked once, then settled into its steady glow. Downstairs, its twin hissed awake, filling the living room with that familiar soft static that had somehow become the soundtrack of this new chapter. He was already uneasy. Long before the first thunder crack, he paced the length of the hallway, nails clicking on the boards, then circling back through the kitchen as if checking exits. The tags on his collar jingled with each turn, an anxious rhythm that pulled at my nerves. I watched him pause at the back door, nose pressed to the gap, testing the pressure in the air like he could taste the coming gusts. "Just weather," I said, though my own shoulders were tight enough to ache. "We've seen worse." When the lights flickered the first time, the sound in the room seemed to thicken. The refrigerator cut out mid-hum. The heater fan whispered to a stop, and for a heartbeat the only thing I heard was the baby monitor's thin hiss. Then the power surged back, lamps blinking, the old clock restarting its steady tick with a little hiccup. I felt my heart leap, then settle, the echo of adrenaline too familiar. Grids old. I told my daughter, "It does this every big storm. Nothing to worry about yet." He left the kitchen then and trotted straight down the hall, disappearing into the glow from the spare room. I hesitated at the bottom of the stairs, a prickling crawling up my spine the way it used to when the phone rang after midnight. Another roll of thunder rattled the windows, long and low. The speaker on the table crackled, then quieted, then carried a faint, questioning sound, half whimper, half sigh from upstairs. He answered with a soft chuff I felt more than heard, a sound of reassurance or insistence. I couldn't tell. By the time the storm reached its peak, the world outside had shrunk to the wet slap of rain and the occasional flash that chased itself across the walls like restless ghosts. My daughter had fallen asleep on the couch, the baby bag at her feet and a blanket around her shoulders. I sat in my recliner, pretending to watch a muted ball game, eyes drifting again and again toward the monitor on the side table. The green light stared back, steady, reassuring. The hiss had become a kind of lullaby. My eyelids grew heavy in spite of myself. Somewhere between one flash of lightning and the next, I must have dozed. I woke not to thunder, but to silence. The kind of silence that has shape and weight. The TV screen was black, the lamp beside me dark. The power had finally surrendered. In that heavy quiet, the usual hums of the house were gone. What remained was a faint, high-pitched chirp coming through the monitor's speaker, sharp enough to set my teeth on edge and prick the back of my neck. He was standing in front of the old baby monitor on the wooden dresser upstairs. I knew it without seeing. "Down here." I could hear the urgency in his breathing, the short huffs hitting the microphone, each one followed by that thin chirp in the background. It took me a moment to place it. Not the baby's cry, not the creak of the rocker. It sounded like a smoke alarm, but muffled, as if it were trapped behind a door or trying to shout through a pillow. My scalp tingled. I pushed myself out of the recliner, knees protesting, and fumbled for the flashlight on the bookshelf. Probably just the battery. I told the dark, the words dry in my mouth and my tongue too thick. Alarms chirp when batteries go. That's all. Another chirp cut through. Higher. Faster this time. Followed by a cough, small, wet, and quickly smothered. Then his bark, short and stern, cracked the air upstairs, and the monitor spat it back at me a half-second later. Whatever had been telling myself dissolved. The storm outside was suddenly the least urgent thing in our world. The stairs felt steeper than they had in years as I took them two at a time. Flashlight beam jerking over the family photos on the wall. Each chirp from the monitor below chased me upward. Sharp pulses of sound that made my chest tighten like an old belt pulled one notch too far. Halfway up, I could smell it not thick or choking yet, but unmistakable. The bitter tang of something electrical getting too hot, threaded with the metallic scent of rain that had found its way where it shouldn't through a tired roof or vent. At the top of the stairs, the hall was darker than it should have been. The nightlight near the bathroom was out with the power, but a sliver of light leaked from the nursery. A pale stripe across the floor like a path drawn for me. I rounded the corner and saw him first, exactly where Id pictured him, planted beside the old baby monitor on the wooden dresser, body rigid, head turned toward the crib. The green speaker light glowed eerily in the room's dimness. Powered by the tiny internal battery I'd forgotten it had. He looked back at me once, eyes reflecting the flashlight's beam, then swung his gaze toward the crib again, letting out a low, urgent rumble that vibrated in my bones. The chirp came again, this time clearly from the small smoke detector above the window, half lost in the corner shadows. A faint haze curled near the ceiling, barely visible until my light caught it, a thin, wandering ghost of smoke seeking higher ground. My granddaughter let out a soft cry, high and confused, then coughed once, twice. That was all it took to move me. I crossed the room faster than my knees liked, the old boards protesting under my weight. He moved in perfect sync, edging along the crib side but not blocking me, filling the space between the dresser and the bed like a guardrail. I scooped my granddaughter up, quilt and all, pressing her close against my chest. Her skin was warm and damp against my neck, fingers clutching at my shirt. But her breathing, though quick, felt strong and clear. "Got you," I whispered, voice shaking. "I've got you, sweetheart." Downstairs, my daughter's voice called my name. ragged with sleep and fear. Dad, what's happening? I shoved the window open with my elbow, letting cold, wet air flood the room and push the smoke toward the ceiling, then thrust the baby into her waiting arms when she reached the doorway. Back down, I told her. Out on the porch. Call 911. Say we smell smoke. The furnace. Maybe. My words came out calmer than I felt. Some old muscle memory of giving clear directions kicking in like it used to on scene. He stayed with me. As my daughter's footsteps pounded down the stairs, he turned back toward the corner where the wall met the floor near the vent. The smoke was wafting in from there now, lazy but persistent, like it had all the time in the world. He pressed his nose to the baseboard, sneezed once, then barked again short, insistent, the kind of bark he used to give on training fields when Head found someone under rubble. It sent a chill through me to hear it in my granddaughter's room. I inhaled shallowly, aiming my flashlight beam along the wall. No flames. Thank God. Just a slow darkening of the paint near the vent and that steady thin stream of smoke. The storm outside boomed again. Rattling the window, it opened, sending cool air across the back of my neck. Somewhere under our feet, the ancient furnace groaned in protest, like an old man forced to keep working. I knew that sound too. My hand shook as I flipped the switch that cut power to it, then reached for the fire extinguisher by the hall closet. An old habit it never quite left behind. By the time the volunteer truck's lights painted the trees red and white outside, the room was already clearing. The firefighter Hod, ridden with my son years ago, stomped up the stairs, gear jingling, and gave a low whistle when he saw the scorch mark by the vent. "You caught this early," he said, pulling off his helmet, eyes travelling from the wall to the old baby monitor on the wooden dresser and then to the dog still standing under the detector, chest rising steadily. Could've gone bad. Walt. If nobody'd been listening up here. We stood in the hallway while they checked the crawl space and poked at ductwork. Rain spattered against the open window, cooling the hot metal nearby. My granddaughter's soft fussing drifted up faintly from downstairs, mingled with my daughter's soothing voice. Every now and then, he glanced toward the sound, then back to the room, as if tracking both worlds at once. Guess somebody was, the firefighter added more quietly, giving the old K9 a gentle pat between the shoulders that carried respect instead of pity. Later, when the storm had wandered off and the house was a patchwork of extension cords and battery lights, I sat in the nursery alone for a moment. My granddaughter slept downstairs in the playpen, my daughter dozing in the armchair beside her. Exhausted, but safe. Up here, the air still smelled faintly of chemical spray and wet drywall. The green light on the baby monitor had finally gone dark, its tiny battery spent on the night's alarm. He lay at my feet, head resting on his paws, eyes turned toward the empty crib as if still on watch. I reached down and traced the line of his collar, fingers brushing the worn tag that still bore my son's phone number, long since reassigned. The pattern of the chirps still echoed in my ears, an almost perfect cousin to the tones that had called Mark out on countless nights. Tonight, for the first time, it answered on this end instead of waiting for news on the other. "You heard it first," I murmured. His tail thumped once against the floor. In that quiet, I finally understood what his staring had meant all those evenings. He hadn't been haunted by old calls. Had been making sure, if a new one came, we didn't miss it. In the weeks that followed, the house took on a new rhythm, like a song we already knew but finally started humming along to. The furnace was replaced with a quieter, safer model, all sleek metal and humming efficiency hidden downstairs. Fresh paint covered the faint scar on the nursery wall where the smoke had traced its path. The old baby monitor on the wooden dresser returned to its post, cord plugged into a new surge protector, green light shining with a confidence I hadn't quite trusted before. He settled into the change like he'd been waiting for it all along. His patrols grew less frantic, more like gentle circuits done out of habit rather than worry. Each morning, he'd walk the perimeter of the yard with me, paws leaving tracks in frost or mud depending on the day, nose sampling the breeze at each corner. When the mail truck clattered past, he'd lift his head but stay by my side instead of trotting to the gate the way he used to for any engine noise. Our walks slid into place like old tools fitting new hands. Neighbours began to stop us more often on Main Street. Word of the furnace scare had travelled faster than the smoke ever did. At the diner, folks clapped my shoulder and slipped him strips of bacon under the table, calling him the hero in voices that carried a smile, not a burden. I deflected the word, but I didn't correct them when they talked about how Head heard what nobody else did, watching him soak in their gentle praise, tail sweeping the floor in slow arcs. I felt a tenderness that was different from the sharp pride he'd felt for Mark. Softer, more daily, like a lamp left on for company. At home, bedtime rituals became less about fear and more about gratitude. He'd help my daughter settle the baby in the crib, smooth the quilt, then check the angle of the old baby monitor on the wooden dresser. He would ease into place nearby, not with the taut readiness of a soldier on post, but with the comfortable vigilance of family. If she cried, he rose and checked. If she only sighed and rolled, he stayed stretched out, eyes half-lidded, but ears still tuned to the smallest shift in her breathing. Some evenings, when the rain on the roof was gentle instead of angry, we'd leave the nursery door open a little wider. He'd sit in the rocking chair with a book, reading aloud in a low voice that mattered less for the words than for the cadence. The baby would eventually drift off, tiny fingers unclenching from the edge of the blanket, head lie in the doorway, body a bridge between hallway and room, one paw extended over the threshold. The green speaker light glowed beside us, a silent third companion nodding along. I found myself talking more first to my granddaughter in drowsy half-sentences about birds and clouds, then to him when she slept, about Mark, about calls he'd gone out on as a younger man, when the volunteer siren meant dropping everything and leaving my wife to calm frightened kids, about the night we lost him, the phone call that broke us open and was followed by an awful, ringing silence. Saying his name out loud in that room had once felt impossible. Now, with my hand resting on fur instead of empty air, the words came easier, like they were finally landing somewhere they could rest. Season slipped over season. We watched the tree outside the nursery window shed its leaves, then shimmer with new buds, then throw shade across the yard where my granddaughter toddled with unsteady steps. He walked beside her at a pace that seemed to defy his memories of sprinting through rubble fields, matching her wobble step for step. When she fell, head plant himself nearby, letting her grab his ruff to pull herself back up, patient as an old fence post that has seen generations of hands. At night, when I heard the faint hiss of the monitor downstairs, I no longer tensed like I was waiting for bad news. Instead, I smiled at the sound, picturing the two of them upstairs. A small form snuggled under a quilt, a larger form curled near the crib, and that steady little light keeping watch on the wooden dresser. The house still listened, but now the listening felt less like waiting for disaster and more like leaning into the gentle rise and fall of ordinary, precious breathing shared between 3 generations. On a late summer evening, nearly a year after the storm, the house was quiet in the best possible way. The windows stood open, letting in the chorus of crickets from the yard and the occasional laugh from teenagers walking down to the river. My granddaughter, now taller and full of questions, had finally surrendered to sleep after insisting on saying goodnight to every stuffed animal in the crib, tapping each one on the nose. The old baby monitor on the wooden dresser glowed, its green eye winking softly in the dim room. He eased himself down beside the crib with the caution of older joints, sighing as his chest met the rug. The white in his muzzle had spread since that winter night, but his eyes were as clear as ever, full of a calm kind of knowledge. He rested his head so that one ear pointed toward the monitor and the other toward the small shape under the quilt. When I lowered myself into the rocking chair, the wood creaked in familiar complaint, but my knees didn't argue as loudly as they once did. Some burdens, it seemed, had lightened while others were shared. Downstairs, my daughter cleaned up the last of the dishes, humming a tune my wife once favoured in the kitchen, soft and unhurried, I could hear faint clinks and water running through the vents. Above those domestic sounds, the monitor's speaker carried the rhythm that had come to define this chapter of my life. My granddaughter's slow breaths, occasionally punctuated by a sleepy murmur, and the subtle shift of his paws against the floor when he resettled. The chorus of living beings I was responsible for had narrowed, but its harmony had deepened. On the dresser, next to the baby monitor, sat one more object now. Mark's old pager, long dead, its screen blank and scratched. He'd found it in a box in the attic and, after a long moment of consideration, placed it there deliberately. The little black rectangle leaned against the white plastic casing of the monitor, the past and present touching at the corners. No tones would ever come through it again, but its silent presence felt right, like an ancestor bearing witness to a watch that had changed shape but not importance. I reached down and threaded my fingers through his fur, feeling the warmth of him, the steady rise and fall beneath my hand. You heard what I couldn't. That night, I said softly, "You've been hearing for me for a long time, haven't you?" His tail tapped once against the floor, a gentle punctuation to my confession. In the hush that followed, the baby let out a tiny sigh, the kind that sounds like contentment wrapped in exhaustion. The monitor caught it, amplified it just enough, and for a moment the room felt impossibly full of air, of sound, of years braided together. As I sat there, rocked by the quiet instead of resisting it, I realized that the old anxiety I'd once felt whenever a device beeped or crackled had thinned to almost nothing. Where alarms had once meant loss, this little stream of sound meant continuity. By the old baby monitor on the dresser, I no longer heard echoes of calls that took my son away. I heard the breathing of those still here, the soft stirrings of a child with her whole life ahead, and the loyal presence of a friend who had somehow carried us across a bridge I didn't know we were crossing. I let the chair sway, let my eyes close for a moment, and for the first time in a long time, the watch didn't feel heavy. It just felt like home. If this story touched your heart, drop a simple 1 in the comments to let us know you were here. Your support keeps these gentle stories alive. Don't forget to subscribe and stay with us, because the next story might just be the one that finds you when you least expect it.